Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again, ready to take a whole stack of technical info. Sometimes pretty dense stuff, honestly.
Sometimes fascinating stuff, too, though.
Absolutely. And we turned it into a clear map for you. Today, we're diving deep into, well, really the essential sound of modern guitar, that controlled breakup, the drive, the grit. We're tracing the technological journey of one truly iconic name, BOSS.
Yeah, and this is, it's way more than just a history lesson about, stomping on a little colorful box.
Right.
We're actually charting the evolution of OverDrive itself, synthesized across, 4 decades now?
40 years, yeah.
Our mission really is to get under the hood, understand the technical architecture, that shift from pure analog op-amp warmth, those simple circuits, to really complex digital precision, and then finally where we are now with these modern hybrid platforms that kind of define tone today.
And what's so compelling about this whole journey, I think, is that constant tension. It's like this war between simplicity and complexity, isn't it?
Totally.
You've got the purist's desire for that warm, maybe slightly unpredictable analog character.
Burnout mojo.
Exactly, the mojo. Versus the modern player's need for, tight, really articulated digital capability and flexibility.
It's a constant battle.
So to kick things off, we absolutely have to start with the spiritual ancestor.
Yeah.
A pedal that wasn't just foundational for BOSS, but you could argue for the whole effects industry. The OD1 OverDrive. Launched way back in 1977.
Oh, you really can't overstate its significance. I mean, before the OD1 distortion, it was often hard clipping, right? Really aggressive, almost fuzz-like sometimes.
Yeah, very buzzy.
OD1 shows up. It's one of the very first compact BOSS pedals ever, and it introduces 2 huge concepts. First, that small enclosure size we all know now.
Standard.
Became the standard, yeah. And second, the big technical innovation. Soft clipping.
Soft clipping. Okay,
Yeah.
That's the key phrase, isn't it? That really defines the difference between what we call overdrive and distortion.
Fundamentally, yes.
But let's be real for a second. Today, the OD1, it's a super sought-after collector's item, costs a fortune.
Oh, yeah.
And it has some serious limitations by modern standards. Yet its sound is constantly being cloned and replicated. Why should you, the listener today, care so deeply about this little 2-knob pedal from 77?
Because basically, the OD1 established the sonic blueprint. It was the template for pretty much every major transparent drive that followed it. That includes the legendary Tube Screamer family,
Right, which came just after.
It defined what players even meant by transparent back then. See, it wasn't designed to just mangle your signal into oblivion.
No.
It was designed to gently push your amplifier, nudge it towards its natural breakup point, to get that warm, dynamic response you associate with, like, cranked vacuum tubes.
But without blowing the windows out.
Exactly. But at a manageable volume, it just set the baseline for what musical gain could be.
Okay. And to guide us through this whole tech trek, we've gathered detailed deep dives on, I think it's 8 key pedals, spanning that whole technological arc.
Yeah, that sounds right. We've got the original analog pioneers, then the specialization models like the bass overdrive, which is interesting, then the sort of groundbreaking digital modelers, and right up to the current hybrid platforms. It shows a really clear path.
Okay, so let's unpack this history, starting right at the foundation, the analog foundations era. This runs from, 77 up into the late 90s?
Roughly, yeah.
And this is where BOSS really cemented the core characteristics of their sound. That warmth, that famous mid-forward focus, and maybe most importantly, that dynamic response.
And we have to begin with the OD1 OverDrive, active between 1977 and 85. Now, the key to its magic, it lies entirely in its architecture. It used an analog soft clipping circuit.
Right. So soft clipping, that means the diodes, they gradually round off the signal peaks. It's not just chopping them off flat.
Precisely. In the early OD1s, they were actually nestled right in the feedback loop of the op-amp, specifically the RC343D quad op-amp in those first versions.
Okay, RC343D.
Yeah, and these diodes, they gradually start to conduct as the signal approaches a certain voltage threshold. It's like a subtle compression of the waveform, not a sudden, harsh amputation like hard clipping.
Okay, so it avoids those really harsh, complex harmonics you get with, say, a classic distortion or a fuzz pedal. It's aiming for something smoother, more amp-like.
That was the goal. But the devil, and maybe the magic too, is in the details of those specific components. Tell us a bit more about that RC34003D quad op amp. Why that chip?
Well, that chip, it was a pretty innovative choice for the time. A quad-op amp means you've got 4 separate operational amplifiers inside one single chip package.
Right, which saves space.
Saves space, yeah. But it also let BOSS achieve a really specific circuit architecture, one that allowed for high input impedance so it doesn't suck tone from your guitar, and low output impedance, which helps drive the signal chain after it. But more importantly, the specific layout. It was optimized to really facilitate that gentle, soft clipping action, and also to create that specific EQ curve, the one that boosted the mid-range.
That famous mid-hump.
Exactly. And here's where the technical nuance of the OD1, I think, cruelly separates it from older clipping circuits. It's the use of asymmetrical clipping in those early versions.
Oh, yes. This is huge.
If you're listening for like an aha moment in OverDrive history, this is probably it.
It absolutely is. This is a foundational innovation. It fundamentally changed how drive pedals sounded. See, standard symmetrical clipping, it clips both the positive and the negative sides of the waveform identically. It's clean, it's even.
Mathematically neat.
Very neat. But tube amplifiers, just by their nature, they're kind of imperfectly symmetrical when they start to overdrive. The power tubes, the output transformer, they introduced these even order harmonics because they tend to clip one side of the wave just slightly harder than the other.
Okay, so walk me through this.
Yeah.
Why does clipping one side, say the positive side, harder than the negative, make the sound more amp-like to our ears?
It's because that specific imperfection, that slight unevenness, it introduces these complex but musically pleasing harmonics. Our ears actually perceive them as natural warmth, depth, character. It sounds richer.
Interesting.
So BOSS, they engineered this asymmetrical clipping specifically to mimic that desirable imperfection of a great old tube amp, like a Fender or a Marshall running hot. It wasn't just a technical choice. You could almost call it a psychological one. It tapped into that warm sonic memory people had.
And the controls were famously, well, Spartan is the word, just level and overdrive. That's it?
No tone knob.
No tone knob, which really says a lot about how dialed in and intentional that fixed EQ curve was, right? They clearly felt it didn't need tweaking.
And baked it right in.
However, we do have to mention the power limitations of this analog ancestor. It wasn't quite plug and play like modern pedals.
No, that purity definitely came with some, let's say, technological baggage from the era. Those early versions, they required the specific 12V ACA adapter from BOSS or a 9V battery.
Right, the ACA standard.
Different voltage. Yeah, it was a specific standard that actually needed a bit more voltage internally to run the circuit properly. Later, BOSS pedals moved away from it to the 9V PSA standard we use now.
So what happens if you try and run an old ACA pedal, like an early OD1, on a modern 9V power supply?
Well, often it just sounds wrong. It sounds kind of starved, maybe dull, weak, because it's not getting the voltage it was designed for, which adds this whole extra layer of complexity and maybe frustration for modern players trying to get that vintage magic.
Yeah, another rabbit hole for collectors.
Definitely. But despite those, minor flaws or quirks, the OD1's DNA, its core sound, it's just pervasive. It's everywhere.
And that successful DNA, it evolved pretty quickly into the next iteration, the OD2 Turbo OverDrive, which ran from 85 to 94. The OD2 concept, it immediately added complexity. It brought in this idea of having 2 distinct personalities, 2 sounds, in one single compact box.
Yeah, BOSS was clearly responding to players who needed more versatility on stage, more than that simple two-knob design could really offer.
So what were these 2 modes?
The dual modes were absolutely its defining feature. It was quite a clever bit of engineering, actually. You had the normal mode, which basically kept that classic, smooth, OD1 kind of vibe, still using those soft clipping characteristics.
Okay, the original flavor.
Right. But then you hit the switch and you engaged the turbo mode, and this dramatically kicked in additional gain circuitry.
But it wasn't just like a volume boost or a simple EQ shift.
Yeah.
It was fundamentally a different level of aggression.
Oh, yeah. It really crossed the threshold from what you'd call overdrive into genuine mid-focus distortion territory.
Interesting.
Turbo mode gave you significantly higher gain, a noticeably tighter bass response compared to normal mode, and a much stronger push in the upper mids. It really did successfully bridge that gap between a pure overdrive and a full-on distortion pedal.
So it let the pedal do double duty, like rhythm crunch and then lead sustain.
Precisely. It made it way more versatile for different genres, everything from like 80s hair metal leads through to heavier blues stuff.
Yeah. That flexibility sounds like a major plus. 2 distinct drive sounds, wide gain range for an overdrive of that era. But naturally, when you add complexity, more gain stages. Yeah. you often introduce other issues, right?
That's always the trade-off in pedal design, isn't it? Turbo mode, while definitely aggressive and useful, it could be perceptibly noisier than the normal mode.
More hiss.
A bit more hiss, yeah. And at really high tone settings, depending on your guitar and amp, some players found it could get a bit harsh or maybe fizzy compared to the smooth warmth of the normal setting.
Okay.
And BAW-SS, they recognized this. Maybe the switching wasn't ideal on stage either, which led directly to that practical stage-focused refinement in 1994, the OD2R Turbo Overdrive.
The OD2R. And that just stood for the added remote foot switch input, right?
Correct.
That seems like a small addition on paper, but I can imagine for a pro player trying to navigate a complex set list, that was probably a lifesaver.
Oh, it was genius stage utility. Think about it. You're playing, you need to kick into turbo mode for a solo, but you don't want to break your concentration by looking down, finding the pedal, and hitting that small switch accurately.
Yeah, easy to miss.
The remote jack meant musicians could now toggle that aggressive turbo mode using a separate, simple external foot switch, which they could place anywhere convenient on their pedal board. Much easier.
So was the core circuit basically the same as the OD2, just with the added jack?
Largely similar, yeah. Still blending those analog soft and maybe slightly harder clipping stages depending on the mode. But the OD2R did offer some subtle refinements. Sources often mention slightly improved clarity and maybe a marginally tighter low end compared to the original OD2.
Okay.
But this model, the OD2R, it's actually quite significant historically because it really represented the last analog overdrive in that specific OD1, OD2 family line before BAW-SS completely transitioned to a modernized circuit with the OD3.
Oh, okay.
It truly marked the end of that first analog era for their main OD line.
Which really raises a big engineering question then. If they had this proven, successful analog architecture, the OD1 leading into the OD2 and 2R, why completely overhaul it for the next one, the OD3? Was it just like keeping up with the Joneses, the rise of boutique drives, or were they hitting a kind of physical ceiling with what those older circuits could do, maybe in terms of headroom or low-end response?
I think it was probably a bit of both, actually. BAW-SS was definitely observing the market shift. Players were starting to demand not just drive, but drive that felt, well, bigger, more amp-like, retaining more low-end clarity without that sometimes nasally quality some earlier soft clippers could have.
Right, that mid-hump could sometimes be too much.
Depending on the amp, yeah. So this brings us into the mid-90s, this era of specialization and modern analog perfection. They tackled both specific instrument challenges, like bass, and also the need for a new, modern flagship guitar overdrive.
Okay, let's start with the specialization first. That brings us to the ODB3 Bass Overdrive, released in '94. And man, this thing was a staple for nearly 3 decades, right?
Unbelievable run, yeah, until very recently.
And it addresses a really fundamental and actually quite difficult engineering challenge.
Yeah.
Getting good overdrive for bass frequencies.
It's a tricky problem. The issue with trying to drive a bass signal is that the fundamental frequency, that low E string, for example, it carries a massive amount of energy compared to a guitar string.
Right, much lower pitch, bigger wave.
Exactly. So if you just plug a bass into a standard guitar overdrive circuit, which is usually designed to clip higher frequencies more readily, you immediately overload those low-end frequencies first. They clip way too easily.
And the result is?
Often just mud, muddy, indistinct sound where the actual bass line, the notes you're playing, kind of disappear into this flubby mess in the mix.
Okay, so the goal for the ODB3 was clear. Get that desirable grit, that harmonic complexity we like from overdrive, but without sacrificing the fundamental low-end clarity and punch that makes a bass line actually work in a song.
Precisely.
So how did the ODB3's analog op-amp circuit manage that trick? What was the secret sauce?
Well, it used analog op-amp-based distortion, similar principles, but crucially, it paired it with some pretty sophisticated EQ filtering that was tailored specifically for bass frequencies. It made sure the clipping action focused more on the upper harmonics and the mids, leaving those deep fundamental lows relatively untouched, or at least less affected.
Lower filtering.
But the real genius, I think, the key control that made this pedal such a long-running standard for so many bassists was the balance knob.
Ah, the balance knob. Okay, let's take a second to really understand this, because this idea of blending signals is something BAW-SS comes back to again and again, even in their super modern digital stuff.
Absolutely, it's a core concept for them now. The balance knob on the ODB3, it's essentially a clean blend control. Think of it as a sophisticated signal splitter and mixer inside the pedal.
Really?
It allows the player to precisely mix the clean, completely untouched bass signal, that pure fundamental low note with all its punchback in, with the heavily distorted driven signal coming from the overdrive circuit.
So you're layering the sounds.
Exactly. It means the low frequencies can maintain their power and clarity, while the mids and the high frequencies get all that desirable clipping, grit, and harmonic richness. It's a really elegant solution, ensuring that the drive kind of sits on top of the core bass tone rather than just destroying it.
That makes perfect sense.
Yep.
You get the power and the foundation from the clean signal and the crunch and character from the drive signal blended together.
Spot on.
And its history really confirms how successful that was. I mean, it became the standard bass overdrive for decades. You heard it everywhere, driving punk and metal bass lines, adding edge to funk, even used for aggressive slap tones where you need both clarity and attitude.
It was incredibly versatile because of that balance control.
Okay, so while they were busy solving the specific problems of bass overdrive, they were simultaneously addressing the next generation of guitar drive. This leads us to the OD3 overdrive in 1997. And this pedal is still available today, right? It remains their modern analog standard, and it really represents the answer to my earlier question about why they moved on from the OD1 architecture.
Exactly. The OD3 represented a really major step, both technologically and tonally, past that simpler OD1 or even the SD1 architecture.
So what exactly was the technical upgrade here? What defined this new analog flagship sound?
The big shift was moving to a dual-stage op-amp design, where the OD1 basically used one main stage for amplification and clipping. The OD3 employs two separate amplification and clipping stages run in series.
Okay, 2 stages instead of 1. What does that allow?
Well, it allows for much greater control over the signal path and significantly increased gain capability before things get messy. It still retained the core principle of asymmetric clipping, which gave it that familiar, desirable amp-like character.
Still keeping that asymmetry.
Yeah, they kept that key ingredient. But the expanded architecture, those 2 stages, allowed for a much expanded frequency range compared to the earlier pedals.
Right, so the sound profile wasn't just that focused mid-forward thing anymore. People describe the OD3 as feeling richer, warmer, and genuinely more amp-like across the whole spectrum.
That's absolutely the key tonal impact. The OD3 has a notably fuller low end, much less bass cut than the OD1 SD1 family, and substantially more headroom.
More headroom, meaning?
Meaning it can handle hotter signals and to get louder before it starts to compress and squash the dynamics. So if the OD1 felt like maybe a small vintage amp being gently pushed.
Like a champ or something.
Yeah, exactly. The OD3 felt more like a bigger, maybe more modern amp head with deeper tonal complexity and greater volume potential before that compression really kicked in hard. It kept that classic BIOS warmth, but it had this open quality that made it sound less boxy, more articulate, especially for complex rhythm playing.
So this pedal, the OD3, it seemed to focus squarely on achieving that really natural-sounding breakup and maintaining touch sensitivity, making it ideal for players who rely heavily on dynamic expression blues, pop, classic rock styles.
Definitely. It really established a new benchmark for transparent analog drive from BIOS, emphasizing a richer, fuller tone with increased usable gain compared to its predecessors.
Okay, so that sets the stage for the analog sound. But as we transition into the 21st century, the limitations of even refined analog circuits, they started to become maybe more apparent, especially with rising gain levels.
Yeah, analog circuits are inherently noisy at high gain settings. You just can't avoid physics. And they often struggle to maintain really clear note separation when you push them really hard with complex chords.
Things can turn to mush.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And this brings us squarely into the digital pivot. Starting around 2001, BIOS began using really complex digital technology to try and overcome these classic analog limitations, focusing hard on versatility and articulation.
And this pivot, it started pretty robustly with the OD20 drive zone, right? Running from 2001 to 2007, this was BIOS's first real attempt at a drive workstation in a pedal.
Yeah, it was part of that twin pedal Zero SM line they had back then, big silver boxes.
Yo, SM, Composite Object Sound Modeling. We need to talk about that. But first, the sheer size of the sound library in the OD20 was kind of staggering for the time.
Oh, it was huge. We're talking 22 modeled drives packed into one unit. And it wasn't just trying to replicate famous non-BIOS pedals like, certain plexi tones or fuzz face sounds.
It did those too, though.
It did some of those, yeah. But crucially, it also modeled BIOS's own internal history. It had models of the OD1, the DS1 distortion, even the infamous MT2 metal zone. It was like a digital archive of their entire gain legacy up to that point.
Wow. So how did this Creo SM technology actually work? Was it just sampling sounds?
No, QSM was more sophisticated than just simple digital sampling. It stands for Composite Object Sound Modeling. The idea was, instead of just recording a snapshot of a sound, COSM attempted to mathematically model the behavior of the physical components inside the original gear.
Like modeling the tubes, the transformers, the diodes, the capacitors.
Exactly, and crucially how all those components interact with each other under different conditions. So the OD20 was essentially running like 22 different complex mathematical simulations of classic gain structures and circuits.
That sounds like incredible utility, especially for a working professional musician. Did that sheer range of features and sounds manage to overcome the fidelity critiques that early digital modeling often faced back then?
For many working musicians, absolutely yes. The features were immense for the time. You had stereo inputs and outputs, which was great. 2 memory slots for saving your favorite sounds.
Only 2. Seems limited now.
Seems tiny now, yeah. But it was useful then. And it had an amp direct switch, which was great for recording flexibility. You could optimize the output, whether you were plugging into an amp or going straight into a recording interface or PA.
So it offered this massive tonal range without needing 22 different analog boxes on your board.
That was the huge selling point. However, the main critique, especially from analog purists, was always that perception of a digital feel.
Okay, tell us more about that digital feel criticism. What did players perceive was missing compared to the real analog deal?
Well, while the tonal range was undeniably huge and the programmability was great, that early CSM modeling, some felt, sometimes lacked the subtle dynamic nuance, maybe the harmonic randomness, that really defined the best analog circuits.
How so?
Think about it. When you play an analog OD1, the exact clipping point might slightly shift based on component temperature, tiny voltage fluctuations from the power supply, how hard you physically hit the string. It's organic, it's slightly unpredictable in a musical way.
Right.
The OD20's models, being essentially mathematically perfect simulations, sometimes sounded a bit flat or maybe even sterile in direct comparison. They sacrificed some of that analog warmth and dynamic bloom for immense breadth and programmability. It was a trade-off.
Okay, interesting. So let's fast forward over a decade now to 2014. Boss S returns to the OverDrive concept, but this time through a completely futuristic lens with the OD1X OverDrive X.
Ah, the X series.
Yeah, and this wasn't just about modeling the sound of the old OD1 again. This was about fundamentally reimagining the classic using really cutting-edge, high-resolution digital technology.
And this pedal introduced the world, or at least the guitar world, to multidimensional processing, or MDP.
MDP. Good. Need to unpack this one, too.
Yeah, because if QSM was about modeling components, MDP is really about intelligent signal analysis. This is the core technology here, and it represents a massive leap in digital articulation for guitar processing.
So what is MDP doing? How does it work?
Okay, so MDP involves digital signal analysis, but it doesn't just treat the incoming guitar signal as one single unified wave to be clipped or processed. Instead, it analyzes different aspects of the signal, things like pitch, dynamics, harmonic content simultaneously in real time.
Wow.
And then it dynamically adapts the tone processing, the EQ, the compression, based on that constantly changing input information.
That sounds incredibly abstract, but also potentially really powerful. Is the MDP engine essentially looking at, say, my low E string when I hit a chord and saying, okay, that's a low frequency, I need to keep the tone stack relatively flat here to preserve punch. While at the same time, it's reacting to my high B string ringing out and saying, that's a higher note, maybe part of a lead line. I'll add a subtle boost to the upper mids there and maybe slightly more compression to help it cut through.
You've basically got it. That's the concept. It's like having incredibly fast, intelligent, multi-band EQ and compression applied dynamically, constantly adjusting itself in real time based on what you're actually playing.
And what was the big problem it was trying to solve?
The major hurdle in traditional analog game, especially high gain, has always been that when you crank the gain way up, the low frequencies often turn to mud. They clip first, they clip uncontrollably, and complex chords lose definition.
Right.
MDP tries to solve that by effectively treating every note on the neck, even the decay of a single ringing note within a chord, almost like its own separate audio stream to be processed optimally. This helps prevent that low-end mush while still retaining high-end articulation and clarity.
Okay, so what was the resulting tonal precision actually like? How did it feel to the player compared to, say, the OD3 or even the OD20?
The sound is consistently described as extremely articulate and highly responsive. You get incredibly tight lows, really clear mids, and smooth highs right across the frequency spectrum, even at high gain.
And the note separation.
The sources really emphasize that the OD1X retains outstanding note separation even at maximum gain levels. You can play complex chords with heavy overdrive, and you can still hear the individual notes ringing clearly. It finally, truly solved that age-old analog problem of keeping complex chords defined when you crank the overdrive way up.
This really does sound like the ultimate shift then, from that organic, maybe slightly unpredictable analog breakup towards pure sonic articulate precision. What are the pros and cons that came out of this massive leap in digital articulation with MDP?
Well, the benefits are enormous, technically speaking. You get that extremely articulate response, an extended frequency range that captures subtleties, an analog pedal, often filters out just by design, and maybe most significantly, a dramatically lower noise floor than pretty much any high-gain analog circuit could ever achieve.
So all the gain without the hiss and hum.
Pretty much, yeah. You get tons of gain, very little noise. However, the classic critique, similar to the OD20 but maybe even more pronounced here, remains. Some players feel it lacks that warm, random, slightly imperfect analog character.
The mojo again?
The mojo is missing for some,
Yeah.
and some players describe its sound as having a slightly hi-fi feel, like it sounds almost too perfect, too polished compared to the inherent musical flaws and randomness of simple, soft-clipping diodes heating up.
It really is that constant tension, isn't it? Technical perfection versus the sort of human, organic imperfection that players often seem to crave in their tone.
Absolutely.
And that very tension, that search for the best of both worlds, leads us directly to the final and perhaps arguably the most successful evolution point in this story so far. The hybrid culmination represented by the OD200.
Yeah, the OD200, released in 2019 as part of their 200 series. This really represents BOSS kind of closing the loop that began way back with the OD1. It's almost like their statement pedal, saying, okay, why force players to choose between the warm character of analog and the power and flexibility of digital when we can actually fuse them together?
Okay, so how is this hybrid architecture actually constructed? Is it just like a powerful digital processor bolted onto the end of an analog circuit? Or is there a more sophisticated interplay happening?
No, it's a very intentional and quite sophisticated interplay. The OD200 employs this innovative hybrid design. Crucially, the input signal from your guitar passes through analog clipping stages first.
Analog first.
Analog first. This is where the initial input dynamics are handled and the core game structure, the fundamental overdrive character, is created. This is the part that lends the essential feel and warmth that analog circuits are known for. Then, after that analog front end shapes the core tone, that signal feeds into powerful, high-resolution 32-bit digital processing. And that digital engine handles all the fine-tuning, the detailed EQ shaping, noise reduction, maybe simulating cabinet responses, applying specific filtering models, all the really complex stuff.
So the analog stage ensures the player interaction, the dynamics feel right under the fingers.
Hopefully.
While the digital stage ensures the massive flexibility, the low noise, and the precision shaping.
That's the core idea. You capture that organic feel first, then you use the immense power of modern digital processing to make it versatile, clean, and programmable.
And the sheer versatility built into the OD200, it seems to cover basically the entire OD family spectrum we've just spent the last while discussing.
It really does aim to be a comprehensive platform. It offers, I think, 12 distinct drive types in total, and it explicitly includes models designed to capture the vibe of the classic, smooth OD1, the aggressive turbo mode sound from the OD2, a more general, natural drive setting, and even some highly sought-after non-bias sounds, like models inspired by Klon-style clean boosts.
Wow, okay.
It is effectively a kind of historical retrospective of drive sounds built into a single, relatively compact box. It allows players to access basically 40 years of overdrive development instantly, but all of it colored and influenced by that initial analog front-end circuit.
And beyond just the range of chord tones, the OD200 being part of that modern 200 series chassis, it also includes a lot of high-level professional features, right?
Yep.
Things that make it suitable for pretty much any modern touring or session player's rig.
Oh yeah, the utility factor is massive. It brings deep editing capabilities, often via connecting to a computer or app. It has a huge number of memory presets, way more than the old OD20 for managing complex set lists.
It's essential these days.
Absolutely essential. And crucial modern necessities like full MIDI input and output for instantaneous program changes and parameter control within a large automated rig. And interestingly, we see the return of an essential feature that was first really perfected way back on the ODB3 bass overdrive.
Don't tell me. The blend control.
You got it. A switchable parallel blend control.
That connection back to the ODB3 is so important, isn't it? It really shows the arc of innovation. They learned something vital on the bass pedal, that blending clean signal back in with the drive preserves articulation, and now they've applied that universally across all drive types here.
Exactly. This is like the ultimate conceptual refinement of that idea. The blend control on the OD200 allows the player to mix their clean, fundamental guitar tone back in with any of the 12 different drive types.
So even under heavy distortion.
Even under heavy distortion, you can dial back in some of that clean signal to ensure you maintain punchy attack, note definition, and articulation. It perfectly unifies the lessons learned from the analog past the need for clean definition, like on the bass with the power and precision of the digital present. The OD200 really feels like the fusion point, the culmination of analog warmth and digital capability, unifying over 40 years of Boss's OverDrive history into one extremely flexible, professional platform.
Okay, wow. So let's try and bring all of this back together for you, the listener. We have covered a massive amount of ground here, charting this really quite single-minded evolution of Boss's approach to musical gain over 4 decades.
Yeah, and looking back, you can clearly define, I think, 3 major evolutionary stages. You can connect the dots through the decades and see how each stage essentially tried to solve the problems or limitations left by the previous generation.
Okay, so stage 1 was the analog foundations.
Yeah.
That spans the OD1, the OD22R, and the OD3. This era really defined that core, organic, often mid-range focused Boss sound. It relied on analog op amps, that clever asymmetrical soft clipping, and really focused on dynamic response to achieve musical, touch-sensitive breakup. But it came with limitations, right? Potential noise at high gain, maybe limited low-end clarity on the earliest models.
Definitely. Then came stage 2. The digital and modeling era. This includes pedals like the OD20 and the later, more advanced OD1X. This era ruthlessly prioritized articulation, sonic precision, and just immense versatility. Through technologies like COSM modeling, trying to replicate classic circuits, and then the really cutting-edge MDP adaptive processing in the OD1X, these digital approaches solved many of the noise and definition problems inherent in high-gain analog circuits.
But the trade-off was?
The trade-off was sometimes a perceived lack of warmth or that digital feel, maybe a bit of sterility compared to the analog circuits.
Okay, and that leads us to stage 3, the modern age. Hybrid perfection with the OD200.
Exactly. This stage successfully merged the warmth and feel of an initial analog gain stage with the incredible flexibility, low noise, and precision of high-bit digital processing afterwards. It really aims to give players the best of both worlds, all wrapped up in a MIDI-controlled, professional, gig-ready platform.
What's really fascinating, listening back to this whole journey, is that regardless of the specific technology they were using, whether it was a simple quad op amp back in '77 or complex KOSM modeling or that futuristic MDP stuff, the underlying mission for BAW-SS, it seems to have remained absolutely consistent, hasn't it? They were always trying to deliver expressive musical gain that reacts dynamically to the player's touch. They consistently sought to replicate that elusive amp-like feel and response.
I think that's spot on. The technology changed dramatically, obviously from a simple 2-knob pedal you could barely power correctly to a multi-model digital workstation with MIDI. But the fundamental sonic goal, that quest for musical, responsive overdrive, it seems like it never really wavered.
It really makes you appreciate that constant tension in the whole pursuit of guitar tone. This journey, just following the OD line from the simple 2-knob, slightly quirky 12-volt OD1 all the way to the MIDI-controlled 32-bit processing analog front-end OD200, it feels like a perfect microcosm of modern musical technology development.
It certainly is. And the fundamental question that remains right at the heart of this evolution, it's really one every single guitarist faces when they're designing their pedal board or choosing their gear.
Which is?
Do you prioritize the warm, maybe slightly unpredictable character and the unique harmonic randomness you get from pure analog soft clipping circuits? Or do you prioritize the tight, incredibly articulate precision and the almost infinite adaptability and low noise floor you get from modern digital processing?
It fundamentally boils down to a choice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Character versus capability. Imperfection versus perfection. What does perfect overdrive actually mean to you, the player?
That's the core question.
And maybe more interestingly, if the OD200 represents the current pinnacle of merging these two worlds, analog feel with digital power, what comes next? Where does overdrive technology go from here? Will the next big step involve, I don't know, AI predicting your playing style and dynamically rewriting the clipping algorithm in the middle of your solo?
Who knows? Maybe.
That's a fascinating question. This journey through the BOSOD line really leaves us mulling over.